What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright, so Deuteronomy chapter 15 is what we're looking at right now, and I just put a little extra southern accent on that there for a second. I really don't know why. So basically for the past few chapters, we've had Moses kind of recapping some of the commandments that were given to the Israelites shortly after they left Egypt the first time, but this is a new generation of them, so he's reminding them of all these things before they go into the promised land, as they were very young the first time around. Possibly not even alive the first time around. And of course, he's been kind of sprinkling in some added thoughts, suggestions, advice along the way. But given his connection with God, it's pretty safe to assume that these are also good ideas for the people to follow. So, yeah. I get a feeling I'm going to have some thoughts on this chapter, especially this first section here. So let me not dwell too long in the intro, and let's hop right into it. Deuteronomy 15. At the end of every 7th year, you must cancel the debts of everyone who owes you money. This is how it must be done. Everyone must cancel the loans they have made to their fellow Israelites. They must not demand payment from their neighbors or relatives, for the Lord's time of release has arrived. This release from debt, however, applies only to your fellow Israelites, not to the foreigners living among you. So, there was previous mention of, like, the year of Jubilee. This seems like a sort of smaller version of that, for lack of a better way to put it, because that's, like, not only releasing debt, but also, like, restoring property and things like that. This isn't quite going that far. But still, every 7th year, canceling debts, like, I'm sure there are a lot of people that are wishing we could do that in this day and age. Although it does say it only applies to the fellow Israelites, not to the foreigners. So there's some debatability on how much that even really applies today. Like, you could argue, okay, maybe Christians to other Christians should have a similar notion. But honestly, on the whole, like, there's stuff in the New Testament where it's made clear that, like, the letter of the law from, you know, the Old Testament, a la commandments listed here in previous chapters, like, it's not so much about the letter of the law that God cares about as it is, like, the spirit of that. So, yeah, I mean, could we still have something like this? Yes. There are a lot of people in high-up positions that would not really go for this in this day and age, in our modern capitalist society, especially here in America, because then they wouldn't be able to profit so much off of the things that they do, including debt. But I digress. I feel like the Christian code for debt is to hold none to anyone. Like, give someone the shirt off your back and expect nothing back for it. Yeah, I did pre-read a little bit of this beforehand, and I think we'll get to some notions kind of closer to that, even in this chapter. But yeah, really, New Testament, it's even more so about, like, hey, go the extra mile, give whatever you have to whoever needs it, or even so much as asks for it, so that, like, you're in no way looking bad, and if anything, you're, like, embarrassing other people with how nice you are, and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I think I'll continue on here Because, like I said, I think some of that notion, at least the concept of it, broadly speaking, kind of comes up in this chapter here. So, let's continue on to verse 4. There should be no poor among you, for the Lord your God will greatly bless you in the land he is giving you as a special possession. You will receive this blessing if you are careful to obey all the commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you today. The Lord your God will bless you as he has promised. You will lend money to many nations, but will never need to borrow. You will rule many nations, but they will not rule over you. Okay, that first verse there, I find particularly interesting, especially this section here. There should be no poor among you. Like, how foreign a concept is that to modern society? But again, this would have been like, just, I mean, at most it would have just been within their land and, you know, the peoples over which they would rule after settling in the promised land. But even at that, it's, you know, that's still, like, with the wide array of wealth situations that we have across the globe, like, I don't think you could even go to any significantly large section of any given country or state or anything like that and not see a significant wealth difference between some people. I mean, even fast forward just to like New Testament times, and Jesus mentions how, I believe the quote goes something like, "There will always be poor among you," which he then, you know, uses to say that, okay, look, yes, it's bad, but you could deal with them later. I'm here now. Your focus should be on me as, you know, the Son of God living here among you. But anyway, sorry, checking up on comments now. Wonder where that changed, in that these people shared and shared alike. Now money speaks louder than any words. Well, first off, they got conquered by other people groups who probably didn't follow that idea, but also, like, they eventually kind of corrupt themselves by following after other ideas and deities from other beliefs around them. So it's unsurprisingly because of falling away from God that this idea drops off and no longer really becomes a thing. Ninja Spaghetti says, Bible times there wasn't really money, so the rich were defined more by how much stuff someone had, like how many flocks of sheep and how much food. Yeah, their wealth was more like that kind of stuff, with like how many animals they had, or how many crops they had, and basically how many possessions that they could use to like barter with and or live off of on their own. And how many people they could provide for, really. Which is an interesting thought in and of itself, that wealth was more about how many people you could provide for rather than, you know, your own monetary gain. Which, that's totally different compared to modern culture. The only faith that's truly and fully selfless is Buddhism. I would say there are other religions that at their core are supposed to be selfless, but like hardly anybody really follows their religion perfectly. Not Christians, not Jews, not Buddhists, not really anybody. And so the way that these belief systems are maybe supposed to be doesn't show in the current day and age. These days you can have high def, massive flat screen, best phone every year, designer clothing, still be poor if you don't have enough money to live. That's, yeah. And that has a totally different spin on, as opposed to the debt that we're talking about here, because people putting themselves in debt just to look good, there would have been no notion of that back, in this time that we're reading from. It was, I have literally nothing but, the clothes on my back and the ability to work. So often they would have, worked off their debt, so to speak, with a certain person or something like that. And that was also part of the motivation for this canceling of debts, was that then these people wouldn't constantly have to work for somebody else to pay off said debt. But yeah, today's poor is different than that day's poor as well. For reasons like that, sometimes. And, I don't know. It's a whole different situation. I'd rather not get too far into it and, into comparing apples to oranges, because it really kind of is that different. I mean, the main similarity is not really being able to provide for yourself and your basic needs long term. But anyway, I already feel like I've been talking quite a lot, because chat is engaging. I like this. It's good. I also, for the sake of my throat and the rest of this stream, maybe want to keep it moving along. But still feel free to continue leaving chat comments and whatnot. But I will move along to verse 7 for now. But if there are any poor Israelites in your towns, when you arrive in the land your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Instead, be generous and lend them whatever they need. Do not be mean-spirited and refuse someone a loan, because the year for canceling debts is close at hand. If you refuse to make the loan and the needy person cries out to the Lord, you will be considered guilty of sin. Give generously to the poor, not grudgingly, for the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do. There will always be some in the land who are poor. That is why I am commanding you to share freely with the poor and with other Israelites in need. So, this even kind of goes back a little bit and adds almost an addendum to the previous statement. It's like, okay, yeah, there should be no poor among you, but there always will be, to some effect. So, since it's basically unavoidable that there will be some poor people, as the first couple of verses in this section say, don't, hold back from, helping them as they need. Because ultimately, you helping them, God will see that, and you will be blessed/rewarded for that. It's not spelled out in what way, because we don't ultimately know for sure whether it's, this life or in heaven. But, I mean, some cases it's both. Sometimes it's just in heaven. But either way, this is, what God wants of us. I mean, I forget the reference, but I'm pretty sure somewhere in the New Testament it says something to the effect of, true worship is this, that you care for orphans and widows in their time of need. Something to that effect. And there's a little bit more to it than that, but that's a big component of it. So, In fact, this even goes as far as to say, if you refuse to help someone, if you're able and they need it, then you're guilty of sin. That's essentially an offshoot of greed, because you're wanting to just keep that to yourself rather than give away what you at least have possession of on this earth that ultimately isn't even really yours. It comes from God in the first place, so why should you be holding on to it as if it's yours to really keep for eternity anyway? But yeah, anyway, I just, man, this is some good stuff. I wish there were more people like this in the world nowadays, is the short version of what I start thinking based on this section anyway. So, I will move along now to verse 12, and covering a slightly different topic here, but still somewhat relevant, but I'll get to that in a bit. So, verse 12. If a fellow Hebrew sells himself or herself to be your servant, and serves you for 6 years, in the 7th year you must set that servant free. When you release a male servant, do not send him away empty-handed. Give him a generous farewell gift from your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress. Share with him some of the bounty with which the Lord your God has blessed you. Remember that you were once slaves in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I am giving you this command. Yeah, so that last little reminder there is like, hey, remember how hard it was when you were slaves in Egypt and you had to work for somebody else day after day for years and years? Maybe not even these people specifically that he's talking to now, but like their ancestors, their parents and grandparents and so on, who would have told them about these things. So, yeah, like, really, that to them should be a reminder that they shouldn't wish that upon anybody. Never mind want to keep somebody in that kind of situation by their own hand. So, yeah. Also, not sending someone away empty-handed also, at least in some cases, would have helped, that person to not just end up running right back to them to be a servant once more. Because if you free them but send them off with nothing, then it's like, well, they don't have anything, so how are they supposed to avoid getting back into debt? Like, really quickly. And so since that makes no sense, at least for the male servants, who would have been more so in charge of the household and its, I don't know if financial situation is quite the best wording, but I can't think of a better way of saying that. So, and their welfare, but yeah. Well, actually, I'm looking ahead a little bit real quick, and it doesn't even say anything for a female servant specifically, but maybe I'm just missing that because I'm just glancing at it. Anyway, footnote here at servant. Or, as in, could be translated as, if a Hebrew man or woman is sold to you. So, really, that covers if they're, willingly if they're willingly selling themselves to a person as like a way to repay a debt, or if they were already in debt to somebody else, but then that person who they're in debt to is selling them off to you. I would assume that's really more so the situation where them being sold to this person would, come into play. But in any case, if a fellow Hebrew were to, become your servant through one means or another, to let him go in the 7th year. And if they're male, give them something so they're not immediately in debt again. Okay. So then, moving on to verse 16. But suppose your servant says, I will not leave you, because he loves you and your family, and he has done well with you. In that case, take an awl and push it through his earlobe into the door. After that, he will be your servant for life, and do the same for your female servants. You must not consider it a hardship when you release your servants. Remember that for 6 years they have given you services worth double the wages of hired workers, and the Lord your God will bless you in all you do. I'm trying to make a little sense of the, worth double the wages of hired workers part. Maybe that's just because, they're doing probably the same work, if not more, first off, but also, they're not necessarily getting paid for it, other than just, them living with that person in their household. Because that's how the, servitude worked, at least among the Jews, Israelites, Hebrews, whatever you want to call them back in that day. It was more of a, okay, you're now going to live with us and help us work our fields and do the things that need to be done around here. So I don't, on a different note, but related to these verses, the whole taking it all and pushing it through the earlobe, I don't know if that was necessarily the original, thing where you'd have ear piercings and whatnot, but definitely an early iteration of it. Of course, now that has entirely different meaning today, but still, interesting how that's probably one of the ways that it got started. And this is all if the servant doesn't want to leave. Don't really have any other thoughts on that section. Moving on to verse 19, and I guess I'll wrap up the chapter with this. Again, another kind of different topic. But again, this is Moses kind of going back and just repeating some of the commandments that were given before with maybe some added thoughts and details. So anyway, verse 19. You must set aside for the Lord your God all the firstborn males from your flocks and herds. Do not use the firstborn of your herds to work your fields, and do not shear the firstborn of your flocks. Instead, you and your family must eat these animals in the presence of the Lord your God each year at the place he chooses. But if this firstborn animal has any defect, such as lameness or blindness, or if anything else is wrong with it, you must not sacrifice it to the Lord your God. Instead, use it for food for your family in your hometown. Anyone, whether ceremonially clean or unclean, may eat it, just as anyone may eat gazelle or deer. But you must not consume the blood. You must pour it out on the ground like water. So, again, so this whole offering the firstborn goes back to, in Egypt when God brought the plagues, the last of which was killing the firstborn sons of any families who didn't, put the lamb's blood on the doorpost and whatnot. And so, as a way of remembering that at least a little bit, that's kind of where some of this idea comes from of setting aside the firstborn of their flocks. There was an earlier command about dedicating firstborn sons, even, human sons, but then they were supposed to pay like a redemption price for them or whatever. In any case, because of that, kind of being the tipping point, at least my understanding then is that, they kind of owe God their firstborn, especially from flocks and whatnot, because that's like how he helped deliver them from their own slavery in Egypt. But anyway, but also, like, God didn't want impure offerings, so if there was a defect in the firstborn animal, then that would not be given as an offering. That would instead just be for them. Okay, so that's going to do it for Deuteronomy 15. A little bit of extra emphasis in that chapter on, like, helping the poor / being considerate to the slaves that they had back in those times, certainly amongst each other. But, yeah. Anyway, I've said all I really want to say regarding the chapter. So, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. Feel free to follow me on Rumble or any of the social media pages mentioned down in the description. Links to those are there, so they're easier to follow and find and whatnot. And down below the description, feel free to, leave comments with your thoughts on this chapter, other Bible-related stuff, whatever you have for me. Let me know down below. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.